Chief xenobiologist Zira Kvex stared at her holographic displays, all 6 of her diamond-faceted eyes blinking in rapid succession. She adjusted her protective exoskeleton, a necessity for Xylaxians in standard atmospheric conditions, let alone here. The readings from Hellfire 7 couldn't be right. She'd calibrated her instruments 12 times in the past solar cycle. Run atmospheric analysis again, she commanded the ship's AI. Analysis complete, the AI responded. Atmosphere composition: 87% methane, 9% sulfur dioxide, 3% nitrogen, 1% trace elements. Surface temperature: 385 Kelvin. Gravity: 3.4 times galactic standard. Radiation levels: critical. Zira's crystalline antennae vibrated with frustration. And the life sign readings? 2,843 Class C bipedal organisms showing signs of sustained habitation and industrial development. Population has increased by 12 individuals since last scan. She pressed her bioluminescent appendage against the observation window, causing her junior researcher, Tyx Naro, to startle so violently his crystalline plates clattered. "They're not just surviving down there, Tyx," Zira said, gesturing toward the sprawling colony below. "They're thriving, building cities, reproducing, in conditions that reduce the Titans to molecular soup within days." The Titans, that ancient species whose remains they still found on devastated worlds across the galaxy. Masters of biological engineering, they'd modified themselves into near perfection. Yet even they had limits. Hellfire 7 had been one of their failed colonization attempts, the entire population liquefying despite their supposed invulnerability. But these humans, Zira magnified the visual feat. A group of colonists was performing maintenance on an atmospheric processor, wearing what appeared to be little more than basic environmental suits. The kind of protection that wouldn't last 10 seconds against the caustic atmosphere. Yet they worked efficiently, even casually, stopping occasionally to share what appeared to be jokes. "Chief Kvex," Tyx said, his voice modulator quavering, "perhaps our instruments are malfunctioning? The radiation alone?" "We've checked everything 17 times, Zira interrupted. "The humans down there are breathing an atmosphere that should be dissolving their lungs, walking under gravity that should be crushing their bones, working in radiation that should have ended their species within a day of landing." She pulled up another feed showing what appeared to be a recreational area. "Look at this. They're growing plants. Plants. In soil that registers as highly toxic on every scan." "The Galactic Science Council will never believe this," Tyx said, his crystalline form shifting colors in distress. "Oh, they'll believe it," Zira replied, her antennae straightening with determination. "Because we're going down there." "Down?" Tyx's voice jumped 2 octaves. "But regulations state—" "Regulations also state that Class 7 scientific anomalies warrant immediate investigation." She was already accessing the ship's communication array. "And humans casually violating what we thought were universal biological constants definitely qualifies as a Class 7 anomaly." The response from the Council came faster than expected. Perhaps even they couldn't ignore the impossible readings any longer. Permission granted for direct contact, with conditions. They were to maintain full protective protocols and under no circumstances compromise their environmental suits. As their shuttle descended through the caustic atmosphere, Zira reviewed her team's credentials. Besides herself and Tyx, she'd brought Dr. Jen Varix, the galaxy's leading expert in extreme environment adaptation, and Professor Renmox, whose work on radiation resistance was required reading at the Academy. Their landing pad came into view, and all 4 Xylaxians fell silent. A group of humans waited to greet them, wearing what their scans indicated were basic environmental suits that would barely protect against a Category 1 toxic atmosphere. A human female stepped forward as they disembarked. "Welcome to New Providence. I'm Director Jasmine Ortiz. We were wondering when you'd finally come down to say hello." Zira's antennae went rigid. "You knew we were observing you?" Director Ortiz laughed. "Your ship's been in orbit for 3 weeks. Plus, those sensor drones aren't exactly subtle. Would you like to come inside? We've set up a pressurized conference room to your specifications. You can take off those heavy-duty suits." The Xylaxian team exchanged alarmed glances. Director, Professor Mox began. The atmospheric composition. The Galactic Science Council's research facility on Hellfire, 7 hummed with activity as the most brilliant minds in xenobiology attempted to understand humanity's impossible resilience. 3 months into their investigation, Chief Xenobiologist Zirikvex was no closer to understanding how humans defied fundamental biological laws. Subject 2 to 47, Raj Patel, demonstrates once again complete immunity to radiation levels that would terminate most species, Dr. Jin Varix dictated into her log. The human in question sat casually in the testing chamber, radiation meters around him screaming warnings, while he solved complex mathematical equations on a tablet. "How are you feeling, Mr. Patel?" Dr. Varix asked through the intercom. "Bit warm in here," Raj replied, not looking up from his calculations. "Mind if I take off my jacket?" Professor Rin Mox's appendages waved in agitation. The chamber is currently experiencing radiation levels equivalent to standing on the surface of an active neutron star. And he's complaining about the temperature? Their confusion only deepened with each test. Humans showed inexplicable adaptations across every metric. Their bones grew denser in response to the crushing gravity, rather than breaking. Their lungs filtered toxic elements that should have been immediately fatal. Their cellular structure somehow repaired radiation damage faster than it occurred. More baffling still was their complete nonchalance about these abilities. "Listen," Isabella Rodriguez, their lead human liaison, tried explaining during one particularly frustrating session. "When we first landed here, things were rough. Lost some equipment, had some setbacks. But humans are really good at adapting. It's kind of our thing. Adaptation requires generations of evolutionary pressure." Professor Mox protested. "You can't just decide to ignore biological limits." Isabella shrugged. That uniquely human gesture that drove the xenobiologists mad with its casual dismissal of scientific impossibilities. "Tell that to the folks who built the first settlement. They figured out pretty quick that if you just sort of—" She waved her hand vaguely. "Lean into it. Your body eventually gets the message." Zira's antennae twitched as she reviewed the latest data. The human colony had grown by another 100 individuals since their arrival. They were expanding their agricultural sector, despite the soil being comprised mostly of toxic heavy metals. Children born on Hellfire, 7 showed even stronger adaptations than their parents. "We're missing something fundamental," she announced during the research team's daily briefing. "Our entire understanding of biological adaptation is based on studying species that evolved in relatively stable environments. But humans evolved on a death world," Dr. Varix finished. "We've all read the historical data on Earth. Extreme temperature variations, constant exposure to solar radiation, dramatic atmospheric changes, aggressive fauna. And they survived it all," Tyx added, his crystalline form shifting thoughtfully. "Not just survived, they thrived. Spread across their entire planet, adapting to every environment from Arctic ice to burning deserts." Professor Mox pulled up a holographic display of human DNA. Their genetic code shows signs of countless near-extinction events. Each time their species was almost wiped out, they came back stronger. "It's as if they're programmed to adapt," Zira finished. "Not through conventional evolution, but through some kind of accelerated response to environmental pressure." Their discussion was interrupted by warning sirens. The colony's AI announced, "Warning. Atmospheric Processor 3 experiencing critical malfunction. Toxic gas levels rising in sectors 7 through 12. The xenobiologists watched in horror as their human test subjects casually got up and headed for the affected area. "Wait," Zira called after Isabella. "The atmosphere in those sectors will be lethal." "Yeah, it'll be pretty nasty," Isabella agreed, already pulling on a basic environment suit. "But someone's got to fix the processor before dinner. It's Taco Tuesday. You don't want to miss Taco Tuesday." The research team observed through their monitors as the humans repaired the massive atmospheric processor. The work took hours, during which they were exposed to concentrations of toxic gas that should have killed them instantly, even with their rudimentary protection. Not only did they complete the repairs, but they also took breaks to tell jokes and share snacks. Chief Kvex, TYX said quietly, watching the humans celebrate their successful repair with what appeared to be a spontaneous dance party in the still highly toxic environment. I believe we need to radically revise our understanding of what's possible. Zira nodded, already drafting a report that would shake the foundations of galactic science. The question isn't how humans are surviving here, she said. The question is, what can't they survive? The answer, she was beginning to suspect, was nothing. And that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Back in her private research pod, Zira reviewed footage from the colony's historical archives. The first landing on Hellfire, 7, the initial struggles, the countless moments where any rational species would have abandoned the planet as uninhabitable. But the humans just kept going, kept adapting, kept treating lethal conditions as mere inconveniences to be overcome. She was about to close the archives when a particular file caught her attention. Medical records from the early days of colonization. What she found there would change everything they thought they knew about human adaptation. But before she could fully process the implications, a new crisis would force them to witness humanity's incredible resilience firsthand. The warning came at 0300 colony time. Hellfire 7's twin suns had entered an unprecedented period of instability, triggering a solar storm that dwarfed anything in the planet's recorded history. These readings can't be correct, Professor Renmox whispered, his crystalline appendages trembling as he studied the data. The radiation surge alone would sterilize most planetary surfaces. Evacuation protocols are clear, Chief Zirikvex announced to her team. We must inform the human colony immediately. Even they can't possibly survive. She was interrupted by Colony Director Jasmine Ortiz's voice over the general comm. Attention New Providence residents. We're tracking a Class 5 solar storm. Engineering teams to your stations. Everyone else, standard storm protocols. And yes, that means today's baseball tournament will be delayed until afternoon. Sorry, kids. The Xylaxian research team stared at each other in disbelief. Not only were the humans not evacuating, they were disappointed about a postponed sporting event. Director Ortiz, Zira called urgently. Perhaps you don't understand the severity. Oh, we understand, Jasmine replied cheerfully. Biggest storm we've seen since landing. But we've got some ideas about handling it. Actually, you might want to observe. Could be interesting data for your research. Over the next 24 hours, the Xylaxian scientists watched in stunned amazement as the human colony transformed itself. Teams of engineers deployed experimental radiation shields, their components fabricated on the spot using locally sourced materials that should have been too degraded by radiation to function. In the agricultural domes, botanists quickly engineered emergency mutations in their crops to withstand the increased radiation. Children were tasked with helping to recalibrate the atmospheric processors, treating the deadly work like a fascinating school project. Look at their cellular structure, Dr. Jin Varix marveled, examining real-time medical scans. Their bodies are adapting to the increased radiation exposure faster than the exposure can damage them. It's as if their entire biology is rewriting itself on the fly. The storm hit with apocalyptic fury. The sky turned colors that had no name in most species' languages. Radiation levels exceeded the measuring capacity of standard instruments. The planet's toxic atmosphere became even more lethal, whipped into storms that could strip the flesh from most species in seconds. The humans responded by organizing a storm-watching party. You can't be serious, TYX Naro said, watching through the reinforced windows as humans gathered in observation domes, wearing their basic environmental suits and carrying what appeared to be refreshments. The light show's pretty spectacular, Engineering Chief Raj Patel commented, joining the Xylaxian observers. We think it's the radiation interacting with the new shield harmonics we developed. Want to join us? We've got snacks. Snacks? Professor Mox's voice modulator cracked. Your colony should be melting right now. The Titans built entire cities out of radiation-proof materials that couldn't withstand conditions like this. Yet you're using locally sourced materials that our instruments say shouldn't even exist anymore. Raj shrugged. Yeah, we noticed the radiation tends to break down standard materials pretty quick, so we started experimenting with different molecular configurations. Turns out if you expose certain compounds to enough radiation, they eventually hit a point where they can't break down anymore. They just adapt, kind of like we did. The storm raged for 3 days. The human colony not only survived but used the extreme conditions to conduct experiments and gather data. They lost some external sensors and had to repair a few atmospheric processors, but treated these setbacks as minor inconveniences. More incredibly, their botanical experiments during the storm led to several breakthrough mutations in their food crops. The increased radiation actually helped speed up the adaptation process, one botanist explained to the baffled xenobiologists. We've been trying to get these tomatoes to grow bigger for months. Nothing like a good solar storm to encourage some healthy mutations. When the storm finally passed, the colony emerged essentially unscathed. If anything, they seemed to have grown stronger. Medical scans showed enhanced radiation resistance across the population, particularly in children. Think we've got time for the baseball tournament before the next storm? Someone asked during the post-storm community meeting. The question was met with general enthusiasm. In her private research pod, Zira reviewed the data from the storm while her antennae vibrated with excitement. The humans hadn't just survived. They had turned a catastrophic event into an opportunity for advancement. Their casual disregard for what other species considered absolute biological limits wasn't just adaptation. It was something else entirely. She began composing an urgent message to the Galactic Science Council. The implications of what they'd witnessed went far beyond mere survival. Humanity's response to the solar storm suggested possibilities that would revolutionize their understanding of life itself. But first, she had been invited to watch something called a Little League Championship game, played by human children in conditions that would kill most adult members of advanced species. She wouldn't miss it for anything. Dr. Jin Varix's discovery came during a routine genetic analysis of third-generation Hellfire, 7 colonists. She'd been comparing their DNA sequences to both their parents and Earthborn humans when she noticed something extraordinary. Chief Kvex, she called, her crystalline form pulsing with excitement. You need to see this immediately. The genetic markers for environmental adaptation weren't just active. They were evolving. Each generation born on Hellfire, 7 showed increasingly sophisticated cellular responses to the planet's hostile conditions. The children weren't just surviving like their parents. They were being born pre-adapted to their environment. It's not just random mutation, Zira realized, examining the data. Their genetic code is actually learning from environmental challenges and passing those lessons on to the next generation. The implications were staggering. Conventional evolutionary theory held that beneficial mutations occurred randomly over many generations. But humans were somehow directing their own evolution in real time, their DNA incorporating survival strategies within a single generation. Further investigation revealed that this ability wasn't new. It was deeply embedded in humanity's genetic history. Earth's fossil records showed countless examples of rapid adaptation to environmental changes that should have taken thousands of generations to overcome. Their entire species evolved on a planet that was constantly trying to kill them, Professor Mox explained during an emergency conference with the Galactic Science Council. Most species arise in relatively stable environments and develop specialized adaptations over millions of years. But humans evolve to evolve. TYX finished. Their DNA doesn't just mutate, it problem solves. The research team's findings painted a picture of a species shaped by constant catastrophe. Ice ages, atmospheric changes, massive geological events. Earth had subjected humanity to almost every possible environmental extreme. Instead of specializing for any one condition, humans had developed the ability to adapt to anything. More incredibly, this adaptation wasn't purely biological. The human capacity for technological innovation seemed directly linked to their biological adaptability. When their bodies couldn't evolve fast enough to meet a challenge, they created tools and technologies to bridge the gap, which then influenced their biological evolution in return. Look at their atmospheric processors, Zira pointed out. The designs keep changing, incorporating new materials and techniques based on how their bodies are adapting to the atmosphere. It's a feedback loop of biological and technological evolution. The breakthrough came when they analyzed the brain patterns of humans during problem-solving tasks. Their neural activity showed the same adaptive patterns as their cellular structure. Humans didn't just endure hostile environments, they actively engaged with them, treating lethal conditions as puzzles to be solved rather than threats to be avoided. It explains their psychological profile, Dr. Verix noted. Other species develop anxiety responses to environmental hazards. Humans develop curiosity. They don't just ask, can we survive this? They ask, how can we make this work for us? The implications extended far beyond Hellfire. 7. Human genetic records showed similar adaptation patterns in every environment they'd colonized. High-gravity worlds, radiation zones, toxic atmospheres, conditions that had stymied other species became just another set of parameters for humans to work with. They're not invincible, Zira explained to the Council, but there's something perhaps more remarkable. They're infinitely adaptable. Given enough time and motivation, humans can survive almost anywhere. The Council was silent for a long moment after her presentation. Finally, the High Chancellor spoke. The question then becomes not what humans can survive, but what they might become. A species that can actively direct its own evolution? The implications hung in the air, both thrilling and terrifying. Humanity's potential seemed limitless. What would they evolve into next? And how would their presence change the galaxy's understanding of what was possible? As if to punctuate these questions, a notification flashed across Zira's datapad. The human colony was launching an expedition to establish an outpost in Hellfire 7's polar region, an area previously considered uninhabitable by any known form of life. She immediately began preparing her team for observation. After all, they were about to witness the impossible become possible yet again. 5 years after first contact with the Hellfire 7 colony, humanity had revolutionized galactic civilization's understanding of survival limits. The Galactic Science Council's annual conference was packed with species from across the known universe, all eager to hear the latest findings on human adaptation. Chief xenobiologist Zira Kvex took the stage, her crystalline form gleaming under the conference lights. Today, I'm pleased to announce that human consultants have helped us establish colonies on 17 previously uninhabitable worlds. The achievements were staggering. Humans had engineered new technologies based on their unique understanding of adaptation. More importantly, they'd taught other species how to push past their perceived limitations. The Arthosians, previously confined to low-gravity environments, now thrived in standard conditions thanks to human-inspired biological enhancement techniques. The Meridians had modified their crystalline structures using principles learned from human cellular adaptation, allowing them to withstand extreme temperature variations. But the most profound change was philosophical. The human concept of impossible had reshaped galactic thinking. Where other species saw absolute limits, humans saw challenges to overcome. Their approach to problem-solving had infected the galaxy with a new kind of optimism. The New Providence colony had grown into a thriving metropolis, now hosting the galaxy's premier research center for extreme environment adaptation. Students from thousands of species came to learn not just survival techniques, but the human mindset that made them possible. The key, explained Dr. Raj Patel during a packed lecture, isn't just adapting to hostile conditions. It's redefining your relationship with them. Every environment, no matter how extreme, has potential benefits if you look at it the right way. He demonstrated by showing how the colony had harnessed Hellfire 7's intense radiation for power generation, used its toxic atmosphere as a resource for manufacturing new materials, and even turned its crushing gravity into an advantage for producing ultra-dense construction materials that were now highly sought after throughout the galaxy. The human children born on Hellfire 7 had developed even more remarkable adaptations. They could sense radiation levels instinctively, their bodies automatically adjusting to protect themselves. They processed toxic elements that would kill other species, converting them into nutrients. Most incredibly, they showed signs of developing limited telepathic abilities, a development that had the Galactic Science Council buzzing with excitement about humanity's evolutionary potential. When asked about the secret to their success, most humans gave the same frustratingly simple answer: we just try things until they work. This approach had led to breakthrough after breakthrough. Human genetic engineering techniques, based on their natural adaptive capabilities, had opened new frontiers in medical science. Their environmental processing technology had made previously dead worlds habitable. Their materials science innovations, born from necessity on Hellfire 7, had revolutionized construction throughout the galaxy. But perhaps their greatest contribution was hope. Species that had accepted their limitations for millennia began to question them. The galaxy entered a new age of exploration and advancement, driven by the simple human notion that anything was possible with enough determination and creativity. As Zira concluded her presentation to the Council, she displayed an image that captured everything humanity had taught them. A child born on Hellfire, 7 playing in conditions that had once killed the mighty Titans, while teaching a young Arthosian how to adapt to the gravity. The humans haven't just survived here, she said. They've shown us that survival itself is just the beginning. The real question isn't what limits we face, but how far we'll go once we stop accepting them. In the audience, Ambassador Isabella Rodriguez smiled. The humans of Hellfire, 7 had already set their sights on their next, impossible challenge, terraforming the planet's polar regions into something even more extreme, just to see if they could. And somehow, Zira knew they would succeed. After all, that's what humans did best. They took the impossible and made it look easy.